ये अटैक हुआ है नूर खान बेस पे।
Those were Pakistani bases targeted by Indian jets, and the generals inside the bases were shocked. Pakistani generals believed that the Chinese air defenses would be defending the sky, but that wasn't the case. In fact, Pakistan now buys roughly 70% of its defense equipment from China, and it seems everything is getting exposed in this war. In fact, reports from yesterday showed that India was able to shoot down one F-16 that Pakistan has and two JF-17 Chinese jets that Pakistan was flying. Well, this is where CCP came back with what CCP always does: fake news. They started promoting this news saying that Pakistani missiles were taking down Indian jets. Here's the report. I'm not claiming anything about the Rafale, but the image being shared is completely fake. It shows repeated patterns, means cloning is used. It's a type of photoshopping that's going on. On top of that, there's inconsistent brightness in ELA, abrupt lighting changes in gradient. That means it's not Pakistan that's doing these edits. China is involved. China is involved in misinformation of Pakistan shooting down French Rafale with Chinese weapons. This was probably an attempt to sell more Chinese weapons to those willing to believe their crap. In fact, this is exactly what happened. Just hours after this fake image came out, the Chinese company that makes those missiles had its stock go up 17%. That was likely millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap added because of a fake image. Now, the misinformation campaign doesn't just stop there. Even Chinese state media got involved in this. Here we have Global Times, one of China's biggest newspaper that's owned directly by the CCP, saying that the Pakistani Air Force, using Chinese weapons of course, has shot down another Indian fighter jet. But they provided no evidence of this. Then this claim was quickly refuted by the Indian embassy in China. Now, I think regular viewers of the channel already know that the Chinese military doesn't have very good quality equipment. That's why we like to call them Temu Army. Much like products on Temu, Chinese weapons fall apart as soon as you get your hands on them. But today I have none other than former Navy SEAL Chuck Farr break down exactly everything that's wrong with China's defense industry and how Chinese weapons stack up against US counterparts. Now, you guys already know that this video exposing the Chinese military is not going to go down well, especially at a time like this when two nuclear powers in India and Pakistan are going head to head in a war. Pakistani military is heavily equipped with Chinese weapons, and that's why CCP bots are going overtime on every single platform, downvoting any post and video that criticize the CCP weapons. That's why we need your help more than ever. If you guys can please hit that like and subscribe button down below, it truly does help us out in fighting the CCP bots and help us out in the algorithm. Now here we have former Navy SEAL Chuck Farr.
Dragon's claws are out and they're gleaming. China's People Liberation Army has morphed from a creaky, inward-looking force into a high-tech behemoth, packing stealth fighters, missile-heavy warships, and modern tanks that could bloody U.S. forces in a Pacific slugfest. From the Taiwan Strait to the South China Sea, Beijing's military buildup is a calculated jab at American dominance, aiming to lock the U.S. out of Asia's contested skies and waters. But beneath the propaganda reels and shiny hardware, the PLA's got problems. Green pilots, shaky technology, and a command structure tangled in Communist Party red tape. Worse, its troops are hamstrung by political indoctrination, corruption runs rampant, and its combat record is a case study in how not to win a war. But let's tear into the PLA's arsenal, its reach, and why it's not the invincible force that Beijing is hyping. We'll dig deep into its training gaps, political chokeholds, historical flops, and the cancer that's eating away at its core. The People's Liberation Army Air Force is banking on stealth and long-range firepower to challenge U.S. air superiority. The new Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon is a fifth-generation stealth fighter. It boasts a 2,000-kilometer combat radius and radar-evading skin. But to duel with F-22s in beyond visual range shootouts, the jury is still going to be out. Its PLA-15 air-to-air missile, stretching 200 to 300 kilometers, outranges the U.S. AIM-120D AMRAAM on paper, but raises a threat to American AWACS and tankers. These are the airborne lifelines of any aviation force. For close-in scraps, the PLA uses the PL-10 missile with a 20-kilometer range, and this heat seeker matches the AIM-9X with high off-bore sight tricks. On strike missions, China's Yaji-12 anti-ship missile with a 400-kilometer range at Mach 3 and its KD-88 standoff missile let the J-20 threaten U.S. ships or bases like Guam from afar. Next on the taxiway is the Shenyang J-16, a 4.5 generation multi-role fighter. It has a 1,500-kilometer radius and can sling PL-15s, PL-12s, and a rack full of ground attack munitions. Its ESA radar and electronic warfare kit make it a versatile brawler, ready to contest the skies over Taiwan or the Spratly Islands. But the J-20's engines, the WS-10C and the soon-to-come WS-15, are prone to coughing, and they lack both reliability and the ability to propel the aircraft at supercruise speeds. With just 200 aircraft in service, with zero combat record, this plane remains a bit of an unproven concept rather than a frontline threat. And its J-16 stablemate is without stealth, making it a sitting duck for America's F-35s. Chinese pilots are short on flight hours and combat experience. Think nuggets and new guys, not aces. The PL-15's untested against U.S. jamming, and the People's Air Force has never fought in a real air war. The U.S. Air Force, on the other hand, is battle-hardened and slick, would likely chew up the PLA Air Force in a dogfight. At sea, the People's Liberation Army Navy, yep, that's its name, is pumping out ships like microwavable egg rolls. The Type 001 Liaoning aircraft carrier at 60,000 tons and the Type 002 Shandong can carry 24 to 32 J-15 Flying Shark naval fighters, each with a 1,200-kilometer reach. The Type 003 Fujian carrier at 80,000 tons is still in trial, and it ups the game with electromatic and spaces for 40 planes, including J-15s, the prototype J-35 stealth fighter, and KJ-600 AWAC. It's China's best shot at a U.S.-style carrier, poised to make waves in the South China Sea. But is it up to scratch? We'll see. People's Liberation Army Navy surface fleet is where the real threat. The Type 05 Hive Renhai class destroyer is a beast, packing 112 vertical launch cells with HHQ-9B surface-to-air missiles and YJ-18A anti-ship missiles. Also adding CJ-110 cruise missiles with a 1,500-kilometer range, and you have a potent surface war threat. Its ESA radar and EW suite rival the U.S.'s state-of-the-art Aegis cruiser, making these ships potential plane killers and submarine hunters all rolled into one. The Type 052D Luoyang 3 destroyer has 64 vertical launch cells, and with 25 of these ships in service, it is the Chinese fleet's eyes and ears, bristling with the same types of missiles. But the Chinese Navy has got a whole whole. The carriers Liaoning and Shandong ski jumps cripple J-15 payload, making them a 6.5-ton combat loadout versus 8 tons for an FA-18 Hornet. That means China's naval aviators leave the deck considerably less fuel and fewer weapons than their American counterparts. Undergunned and low on fuel is not a good way to show up to a dogfight. The new carrier Fujian's catapults supposedly fix the ski jump problem, but its 40-plane carrier air wing is half that of a U.S. carrier's. Chinese pilots are novices at carrier ops, and their limited payload at launch requires pre-mission in-flight refueling, and that makes both aircraft and carrier vulnerable to attack. The Type 055 and the 052D destroyers are frankly top tier. Chinese Navy has never fought a naval battle, let alone fought a war at sea. U.S. admirals with decades of blue water experience would run circles around the Chinese Navy in any prolonged campaign. Chinese naval aviation is a weak link rather than a force multiplier. The J-15s are shackled by ski jumps, and the J-35 and the KJ-600 are not yet deployed and still in the lab. Smaller air wings mean fewer sorties, and untested crews mean flight deck ordnance and fueling accidents. It turned Beijing's carriers into floating barn fires. Accidents happen, even on U.S. carriers, and Chinese damage control is an unknown quantity. The short answer, People's Liberation Army Navy can stir up trouble, but it's not ruling the wave. On land, People's Liberation Army ground force is modernizing, but not without a few stumbles. The Z-20 helicopter, a rivet-for-rivet knockoff of American's Black Hawk, hauls 10 to 12 troops or a ton of gear, boosts mobility for flashpoints like Taiwan or the Himalayas. The HJ-12 anti-tank missile, with a 4-kilometer reach and a top attack capability, could rip through U.S. Bradleys or Strykers. China's Type 99A tank, with a 125mm gun and active protection, matches early models of the M1 Abrams. And the Type 15 light tank, 35 tons, is nimble for rough terrain, but maybe a bit too light to slug it out with the big boys. All of these capabilities are what it says on the package, but all of these platforms are vulnerable to javelins, and none of them have ever heard a shot fired in anger. Chinese armor has got issues. The Type 99 sensors and fire controls lag decades behind the M1A2, and its autoloader, frankly, is a man-eating death trap. And those results are in training. Problems in a shooting contest will make this contraption even more deadly. It's been noted that Chinese export models break down like cheap toys, hinting at shoddy quality control. The People's Liberation Army ground force hasn't fought since 1979, while U.S. armored forces hone their craft in Iraq and Kuwait. Infantry gear is another sore spot. China's QBZ-95 infantry rifle is frankly a kludge with a trigger. The QBZ-191, its replacement, is rolling out, but constant changes in an issued rifle screws up infantry training. There is also the issue of a soldier's basic loadout. A Chinese soldier's kit, rifle, basic armor, maybe an optic, cost $1,500 to $2,000. A U.S. grunt's gear with night vision, comms, top-notch armor runs $17,000 to $20,000 per soldier. That gap means U.S. troops dominate at night and coordinate faster. Chinese body armor's often subpar, leaving soldiers exposed. China's biggest Achilles heel is training. Chinese soldiers spend 20 to 30% of their time on political indoctrination, memorizing Communist Party slogans instead of mastering tactics. This isn't just a quirk, it's a systemic malfunction. The People's Liberation Army ground force emphasizes loyalty to party over combat readiness, leaving troops underprepared for the chaos of modern warfare. Small unit tactics, combined arms, and initiative among NCOs are afterthoughts, stifled by a rigid, top-down, micromanagerial culture. Urban warfare, counterinsurgency, the PLA's got no playbook, while U.S. forces wrote the manual in Fallujah and Helmand. Contrast that with the U.S. military, where training is laser-focused on fighting and winning. American troops drill relentlessly on marksmanship, maneuver, and joint operations, logging thousands of hours in realistic training scenarios. NATO soldiers are trained to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Chinese are trained to obey and move if and only if they are directed. Not a great way to deal with the 360-degree chaos of a modern battlefield. In the air, U.S. pilots average 200 to 300 flight hours annually, honing dogfighting and strike mission skills. Chinese pilots scrape by with 100 hours, often in outdated simulators. U.S. naval and marine aviators train for blue water battles, and the U.S. Air Force's equipment, training, and doctrine are generations ahead of their Chinese imitators. The result? A U.S. Air Force that's flexible, battle-tested, and ready to improvise. The PLA, by contrast, is playing catch-up, its troops more parade ground than battlefield ready. The PLA is not just an army, it's the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party, and that's a problem. Unlike the U.S. military, which answers to the Constitution and a civilian government, the PLA swears loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party, not the nation. The Central Military Commission, chaired by Xi Jinping, calls the shots, with party cadres embedded at every level, frequently crossing wires with the real military commanders. As in the former Soviet Army, this overlap of military and political command breeds inefficiency and mistrust. Officers are often promoted for strictly political reliability, not competence. And the buying of ranks and positions, corruption and bribery remain a common and widespread practice. And the co-equal political and military command structure means strategic decisions can prioritize party optics over battlefield logic. The structure stifles initiative and muddles the chain of command. In a crisis, Chinese commanders might hesitate, waiting for party approval, while U.S. officers are trained to act fast and adapt. The CCP's grip also perpetuates corruption, which we'll get into, but it's worth noting that political loyalty often eclipses military merit, leaving the PLA with a leadership that's more red than ready. China's combat record is a cautionary tale, and the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War is Exhibit A. Fresh off Mao's Cultural Revolution, China invaded Vietnam to punish Hanoi for ousting the blood-soaked Khmer Rouge from Cambodia. The PLA, with 600,000 troops and Soviet-style gear, outnumbered Vietnam's battle-hardened army 10-1. Game over, right? Well, you'd be right, but it was the Chinese who got stomped. Chinese tactics were rigid, relying on human wave assaults that Vietnam's battle-hardened guerrilla veterans ripped to pieces. Soviet-designed equipment, like the Type 62 tank, broke down in Vietnam's jungle, and logistics collapsed under the strain. Chinese commanders, paralyzed by inexperience and political oversight, failed to adapt. After a month, China limped home, claiming victory but leaving almost 60,000 dead and a humiliated military. The debacle exposed the PLA's weakness: poor training, outdated doctrine, and a command structure crippled by politics. Vietnam, a smaller foe with less gear, outfought China through grit and know-how, qualities the PLA still struggles to match. And this wasn't just a one-off. China's border clashes with India in 1962 and in 2020 showed similar issues, with logistical snafus and tactical blunders undermining numerical advantages. China's only recently woken up to the need for joint operations. In 2015, the PLA overhauled its structure, creating theater commands to integrate air, land, sea, and rocket forces, a nod to the US-style Joint Operations Command structure. The Western Theater Command, for example, handles India's border, while the Eastern Theater eyes Taiwan. This shift aims to break down service silos and streamline ops, but it's a work in progress. Decades of compartmentalizing, stovepiping, and deadly inter-service rivalry means services still bicker over turf, and joint exercises are more scripted than realistic. The U.S., with 70 years of joint doctrine sharpened in wars from Korea to Iraq, runs circles around Chinese in coordinating complex multi-domain campaigns. The PLA's playing catch-up, and it's got a long way to go. And then there is an elephant in the room: corruption. Now let's talk about the rot eating the PLA from within. It's not just a problem, it's how things get done. Senior officers have been caught siphoning billions from fake contracts to selling rank and promotions to key spots. In 2023, Xi purged dozens of generals, including the rocket force brass, over graft tied to missile programs. Equipment quality suffers. Think substandard armor or missiles that don't fly straight because kickbacks come before quality control. Training budgets vanish into officers' pockets, leaving troops with outdated gear and half-baked drill. The PLA's logistics, critical for sustaining a Pacific war, are riddled with fraud, risking breakdowns under pressure. This corruption's not just a money pit, it erodes trust. Soldiers see their leaders getting rich and fat while they starve and train with shoddy rifles, worn-out uniforms, and boots that fall apart. This destroys morale. The U.S. military isn't perfect, but its oversight and accountability dwarf China's. The PLA's corruption isn't secret. Xi's purges scream it, but rooting it out and gutting the officer corps is a tall order. Until then, it's a wild card that could kneecap China in a real fight. The bottom line, the dragon's got teeth, but it's no titan. China's war machine is a force to reckon with. The J-20 and the PL-15 are of concern to the U.S. Air Force. The Chinese Navy's modern destroyers and Fujian aircraft carrier can make the Navy sweat. And the Type 99A and the HJ-12 will give the U.S. Army a headache. With numbers, home field advantage, and an anti-access, anti-denial network on paper, Beijing's got the tools to make a Pacific war turn ugly. But don't drink the Kool-Aid. The PLA's gear is shiny but untested. Its pilots and sailors are green, and its tanks and rifles cut corners. Training's a mess, choked by party propaganda, and corruption is a cancer eating away at readiness. The world's attention is focused on Taiwan. Will China invade? Right now, for China, that would be a mistake. Maybe it'll be the last mistake China will ever make. An amphibious projection of power is by far the most complex military evolution that there is. It calls for practice and the precise application of all of a nation's military arts. Its naval, marine, aviation, ground warfare, space forces, and global logistics have to work seamlessly and to a standard requiring perfection. Think Normandy times 100. Is China up to that task? An amphibious invasion of Taiwan will require China to keep invasion forces supplied, not just for the initial assault, but for a long, possibly years-long campaign to subdue Taiwan's armed forces and a population that is sure to resist by guerrilla war. This means China will have to hermetically seal the Taiwan Straits. Could the Chinese Navy pull this off? After all, it's got the world's largest navy. The short answer, in this naval officer's opinion, is no, they can't do it. Sure, they outnumber the U.S. Navy, but we aren't comparing similar capabilities or experience. The U.S. Navy has been a global force, a true blue water navy for decades. U.S. carrier battle groups are without equal, and U.S. submarines are still the best in the world. Chinese destroyers, though sexy, are untested in actual anti-submarine warfare. To drop the war college talk, China's still using water wings and training wheels. There is also the consideration of the scope of the conflict. China's strategic objective is actually a fairly localized affair. China will be pulling out all of its ships, carriers, amphibious forces into one small location, the Taiwan Straits. This will create a target-rich environment for the U.S. Navy, which can concentrate its forces to destroy China's Navy in a series of attritional strikes. With China's naval, logistical, and amphibious capabilities gradually diminished, whatever combat troops it would be able to land in Taiwan will die on the vine. Out of ammo, out of food, and eventually out of options. China wants Taiwan, no doubt. But for the short and intermediate future, Beijing would be wise not to attempt a peer-on-peer fight with a naval superpower that's already won 2 world wars and has decades of experience projecting power at sea, in the air, and on land. China's 1979 Vietnam fiasco showed what happens when politics and incompetence collide, and the PLA's Joint Command is still half-baked. For now, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be a disaster, but a much, much bigger fiasco. The U.S. brings scars, tech, and a culture that breeds fighters who adapt, improvise, and overcome. Right now, China has party hacks and apparatchiks. If the balloon goes up in the Taiwan Straits, American grit, experience, and alliances will keep it ahead, provided it doesn't sleep on the dragon's rise. In the meanwhile, the Pacific's a powder keg, and when the next spark will be struck is anyone's guess.
YouTube is growing so fast that it has just overtaken Netflix to become the most popular app on TV. That's just on TV, by the way. If you combine TV, phones, computers, tablets, people are spending an insane amount of time watching YouTube. This is exactly why YouTube is paying creators $45,000 per minute. That's $64 million every single day. So, if you have ever thought about starting a YouTube channel for yourself, now is the perfect time. And if you're looking to learn how people grow on YouTube in 2025, like this guy who got millions of views in just few months of starting a channel, then I have a solution for you. This weekend, I'm holding a free bootcamp for beginners where I will share all our YouTube advice and answer any question you have about growing on YouTube. If you're interested in learning from this bootcamp, you can sign up by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen.